After graduating from Cambridge with a first in hospitality, I was lucky enough to land myself a job in Windsor Castle, the stately home of our most dear, beloved royal family. I was hired as a junior footman, which requires a veritable host of skills and aptitude, but it mainly involves standing still, not making eye contact, and opening doors and gesturing directions with a bow. It was my dream job, a life of subservience to nobility, and I was utterly delighted. But of course, as the new boy, I would have to endure certain initiations and rites of passage, from scrubbing floors on my hands and knees to polishing Prince Charles's extensive collection of brogues, as well as various other pranks. They played on my naivety, and I didn't mind too much to begin with, but one evening they took their pranks and shenanigans a step too far. It was on the day the family would return from official duties, so as you can imagine, the domestic staff were frantic in preparation for their arrival. It would be the first time I would see the Queen or any of her royal members, so I was too nervous and was eager to fulfill my duties that day. Peter, a senior butler, who was largely responsible for some of the more elaborate pranks, had determined to keep me out of sight by sending me to isolated parts of the castle, to dust bookshelves and make sure that certain doors were locked or unlocked. The quicker I returned having completed the job, the angrier he appeared, for he sent me to the pantry in the main kitchen to take a stock check, and within a few minutes of entering the large damp room, I heard the door slam shut behind me, and the bolt sliding into place to prevent me from getting out. "Come on, guys!" I shouted, banging on the thick door. But even if they had heard me, no one came back to let me out, and I was trapped in there for what seemed like the best part of the day. I was cold, bored, angry and hungry. There was a wide selection of foods in the pantry, of course, but stealing from the royal household would be grounds for immediate dismissal, and it was mainly dried and cured meat, for which I had no particular desire, due to the collective smell in that enclosed space. After hours had passed, I had come to the conclusion that Peter's shift had long ended, and no one would be coming back to let me out until the next day. So I wandered about the pantry looking for means of escape. Weaving through the hanging meats and rare sausages, I found a panel in the wall at the far end of the room. It took a few attempts, but finally managed to prise it open and enter the narrow space behind the walls. Shuffling sideways, I made my way to another partially opened panel, which led to a set of winding steps, which I could barely make out in the diminished light. They led to a part of the castle I'd never been before, a corridor with 5 or 6 doors either side, of which I roughly estimated to be the 3rd floor or somewhere in the very centre. I moved very quietly, not knowing what excuse would be if I was caught roaming the castle at this time of night. I listened at the doors and gently pushing the handles to see if they were locked. As I drew closer to the final door, I realized that there was music coming from it, and people laughing and cheering. There was no other way out. It was either that or make my way back to the room of meats. So I slowly opened the door, hoping no one would hear the creak over the sound of music, and peered inside. At first I could not understand what I was looking at. They were familiar faces of the Windsor family sitting in what looked to be an opulent living room, all gathered round a television, where another figure was standing wearing a white gown and playing Guitar Hero. I thought perhaps the fumes from the hanging meat had caused a hallucination, but there in front of my very own eyes was a 7-foot-tall lizard creature wearing a dress and not missing a single note on rendition of AC/DC's Highway to Hell. I stood there, frozen in shock, unsure of what to make of what my eyes were showing me, when suddenly the reptilian stopped playing and jerked its head out towards my location. I quickly backed away and ran back towards the panel in the wall, But before I could open it, a loud aggressive voice boomed behind me.
"Oi, you little prat!"
I turned to see the reptilian running towards me, its silk dress flapping around its lithe, muscular body. I gouged my fingertips into the side panel, but it was too late. The brisk lizard leapt powerfully into the air and landed clean on top of me, body slamming my slight figure into the marble floor tiles. It pulled me to a standing position by my collar and pinned me to the wall, staring into my soul with its bright green eyes.
"What do we have here?" it said. "A little snooping worm, that's what it is."
By now the Windsors had come out into the corridor and were jeering the lizard and him.
"Yeah, hit him, Liz. Give him a right thorough hiding."
It was at that moment that I realised that the creature was indeed Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
He's seen too much,"
shouted Prince Philip from the
him.
back of the crowd. I thought I was a dead man. Liz was strong and there was no visible means of escape. I resigned to my fate, closing my eyes and gulping. She came closer, pushing her scaly snout into my face and sniffed me, and then said, "Forget it, Phil. He's a dirty little worm. I wouldn't eat this one if he was covered in jam." They all looked disappointed, and Philip said,
"At least bite his head off then."
But instead she looked at me, pushing me back against the wall, and said, "You and get that fucking butler." Philip ran to fetch the butler, as she commanded, and in the meantime she slapped me about, intimidatingly, and administered a few Chinese burns. "I almost beat my high score then, you little prat," she chipped in. The rest of the royals laughed and began to shape-shift into an assortment of reptiles, flicking their tails at me and calling me the worm. Prince Charles came over at one point and flicked my ear really hard, calling me a dirty little fucking slug. When Philip returned, he was accompanied by Peter, who was smiling and rubbing his hands together. "Here," said the Queen, "you can eat this one," and threw me towards Peter. "Most generous of you, Mom," he replied as he twisted my arm behind my back and led me away. He took me out of the corridor via one of those locked doors and down an old rickety lift, licking the back of his ears with a forked snake-like tongue. I struggled and tried to break free, but he was just as strong as Liz. "There's no use in that," he told me. "I'm going to marinate you in parsley sauce." I wasn't fond of Peter at all, and he made my first few weeks there rather difficult. And now he was going to eat me. I didn't want to get out of like this, not a tasty treat for a reptilian butler. Something came over me, a surge of resilience, a wave of adrenaline, and I was suddenly absolutely livid. The lift opened, and without even thinking, I slammed the door. I slammed the back of my head into his face, causing him to loosen his grip, and then ran towards the diamond-panelled window at the end of the hallway and jumped right through, with no idea where I would land or if I would survive the fall. Luckily, I landed rather springingly on a topiary bush, which trampolined me briefly back into the air and then down onto solid ground, leaving me with only minor cuts and bruises. I got up and ran as fast as my legs would carry me down the long walk, a 3-mile long road that leads out of the castle. Just as I thought I was safe, I heard another window smash behind me and turned to see Liz in pursuit, still in lizard form and still angry as before, shouting a torrent of abuse as she ran at the place and almost catching me before doubling over and fighting to catch her breath. "You little prat," she shouted. "You're sacked. Don't let me see your face around here again. The last time I looked back, she was standing there, shaking a clawed fist, reeling off inaudible swear words, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I felt as though I was running at 200 miles per hour. I didn't stop running until I left the grounds. Of course, I never went back, or told anyone the real reason I lost my job at Windsor Castle. I doubt that anyone would believe my side of the story. A few days after the incident, though, I received an official letter from the Queen herself, telling me to keep my mouth shut, otherwise she would come to my house and give me a slap. The additional threat wasn't necessary, though, and as I have lived my life in fear ever since, and even today, I find it hard to look at the back of a £5 note without seeing Liz's shape-shifting reptilian face looking back at me.